Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and this short video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous night of the local time. And of course the most important updates are coming from Donetsk direction from the Battle of Avdiivka. The Russian sources reported that as a result of fierce clashes, if you remember, a few days ago on the 10th and 11th of October, as a result of clashes, the Russians managed to establish control over this landfill that located on the northeast from the chemical plant. And this morning the Russian sources reported that as a result of counter-offensive operation, the Ukrainians managed to implement first the concentrate forces and counter-attack. The Russians were forced to step back from this landfill. But the sources are not saying that Ukrainians entered this territory or something like this. They think that I understand the Russians during the previous 2 days haven't managed to dig in deeper and to clear this territory. The Ukrainians probably the previous night and the previous evening concentrated forces and launched an offensive operation that forced the Russians to step back. Of course, the Russians left some surprises and traps in this area, but the Russians retreated towards more reliable positions. Today, obviously, the Russians are going to concentrate another power, another forces with the fresh forces, and during the day the Russians will make another counter-attack trying to complete secure this landfill and to establish 100% control over this territory. The Ukrainians haven't entered the landfill. They forced the Russians to step back under very heavy fire, so under very heavy artillery fire, mortar fire, and probably with under the pressure of HIMARS strikes. So currently this is the most important area, and the most important clashes are taking place exactly for this landfill. During the previous night, the Russians continue bombing and attacking Avdiivka with all types of weapons they have. On this video, we can see the usage of these thermobaric strikes, rounds. The entire Avdiivka was under very heavy fire. The Russians were using this type of weapon for many purposes. One of the purposes is to establish at least visible control, to see the situation, to control the movements, and furthermore not to allow the Ukrainians to move along this like forest of fire. As a result of those strikes, we don't have any updates regarding the Ukrainian losses. The Ukrainian sources published few videos of first days of clashes between Krasnogorovka and Berdychi. Another video we got from the area, from the road between Berdychi and Krasnogorovka. The Russian armored vehicle was moving in direction of the combat line, but at some point, at some second of this video, we can see how the Ukrainian reconnaissance team managed to get as close as possible to the Russian positions from the city by the name of Novokalinovo. They crossed the railway, they established their fire position here, and when the Russian armored vehicle was moving in direction of the railways, the Ukrainian commandos sabotage group attacked the Russian armored vehicles, and that armored vehicle was destroyed. Of course, this episode is not so important. The most important one from this video is that the Russians still have problems on the northern flank from Krasnogorovka, that there are still possibilities for the Ukrainian sabotage groups to cross the fields and to establish positions very close to the Russian made supply and support roads and to attack them using grenade launch equipment or to establish mines and so on. Probably the Russians during the day will try to secure this area. At least they need to establish 100% secure territory on the north and not to allow such episodes to repeat in the future during the next few days, because the next few days are going to be the most important, because obviously the Ukrainians will launch counteroffensive from Solovyova in direction of the salient between Berdychi, Stepovo and Cheretina. Furthermore, we got the video from the Russian sources, how the Russians were bombing and attacking the Ukrainians along the railways, on the Ukrainian side of the railways, obviously, using FPV drones. The Russians published a series of attacks against the Ukrainian stronghold that was located below the railways, and as a result of those strikes, we see that the entire stronghold was destroyed under very heavy pressure, and of course those attacks cleared the territory and created a secure road for the Russians to attack further in direction of the city, of the village by the name of Novokalinovo, if the Russians are ever going to do this. Maybe they just wanted to force the Ukrainians to step back and to create something like a buffer and not to allow the Ukrainians to cross this territory and to attack the Russians on the main supply road between Krasnogorovka and Berdychi. When talking about southern direction, during the previous night we haven't received nothing from the area on the south of Avdiivka and from the area in the south of Severny, but we got more details and more more updates regarding another wave of Russian attack, another direction of the Russian attack from Peski in direction of Pervomaiskaya. During the previous day, the Russians managed to concentrate also significant number of armored vehicles, tanks, and so on, and they launched an offensive operation trying to force the Ukrainians to step back. The Ukrainians on this direction controlled the situation because when talking about this area, the Ukrainians were using artillery systems of South Donetsk direction that were located behind Nivolskaya and behind Krasnogorovka that located under Ukrainian control on the south. So there were no problems from Ukrainian side in artillery systems, so they felt themselves pretty comfortable and they started bombing and attacking the Russian forces with all types of weapons they have. As a result of those clashes, the Russians lost at least few armored vehicles, including one tank, but the Russians managed to maintain the gray zone and to capture another true line. So as a result of that offensive operation, the Russians established control over the gray zone, and currently they are ready to continue offensive operation further in direction of, let's say, the road between the three lines, in direction of the road between Pervomaiskaya and Nivolskaya. During the previous day and the night, the Russians were bombing the Ukrainian positions in Pervomaiskaya using tossed flamethrower systems, trying to pin them down and to secure the next upcoming Russian offensive operation that took place that we just discussed in the previous video. I'll remind you that during the previous day, on the 12th of October, we got another video of another Russian attack on the northern flank of Pervomaiskaya. The same tactics, the significant armored fists with significant number of armored vehicles and infantry were moving on the northern part of the same city, and currently we understand the exact Russian plan. So yesterday's attacks took place in this direction, and as we can see, the Russians are planning and trying to attack Pervomaisk at least from two directions, between the fields on the south and along the city, along the village from Vadiana to Pervomaiskaya. But yet the Russians haven't managed to achieve big results. Currently just a small progress on the ground for another 300 or 600 meters, nothing more. Interesting updates are coming from the south in direction from Novomikhailovka. If you remember, yesterday we discussed that as a result of very fierce clashes and heavy losses, the Russians managed to establish positions on the south of Novomikhailovka, and basically they have already prepared everything for upcoming offensive operation using the broad frontline attack from the south. The Ukrainians during the previous night started bombing and attacking the Russian positions, the Russian infantry, using FPV drones. Those infantry soldiers that managed to they were trying to dig in deeper. There were a lot of attacks with FPV drones, but currently we got more details of another Russian attack from the north. We got another video how another Russian tank was moving to the south, and this tank had, according to this video, bypassed the Zverinya stronghold, and that tank had demining equipment on board, and that tank was demining fields, was clearing fields, and was attacking the Ukrainian positions on the south in direction of Novomikhailovka. This is a very important video because we see that the Russian forces on the south, on the bottom of Novomikhailovka, have already got on their attack position, but the Russian forces on the north haven't managed to complete the preparation before attack to Novomikhailovka in time. And currently they need to speed up. They're risking a lot. They need to demine significant number of fields. Furthermore, they need to capture a lot of strongholds, a lot of trenches, and a lot of Ukrainian shelters on the north. And we see that there is a real unsynchronized between two attacks, and it's very difficult to even understand and project how long the Russians need to complete the battle for the north, because before the Russians are able to get to the let's say straight attack line like on the south, they need at least 1 week or even more, maybe 2. Because the tank was attacking something like here. He was moving, operating in this area. That means that as a result of this geolocation, we can say that the northern stronghold was taken by the Russians during the previous days. Furthermore, meanwhile, the Russians are trying to demine the fields and clear the fields, let's say on the left stronghold. When talking about the right stronghold, the Russians still have a lot of job to do. During the previous day, the Russians published significant number of videos of FPV drones strikes against the Ukrainian trenches and positions in that stronghold. There are a lot of Ukrainian forces. They control this territory, of course, under very heavy fire. Obviously, the Ukrainians understand that they can't step back, because if they retreat, the Russians will be able to get the last defense line in front of Novomikhailovka. So, as I understand, the Ukrainians are planning to control this territory as long as possible, trying to reduce the Russian possibilities, and they will not count the losses, but with one purpose: to control hold this territory. So according to information and geolocations we have, currently the Russians are trying with tanks to clear this territory. So, and this will allow the Russians to get the edge defense belt and to capture new line, this one, which will allow the Russians to increase the pressure against the final defense belt that located on the south from this line. And I'll remind you that this is the only area where the Russians are using kamikaze machines. So obviously they're not going just like demine this territory with tanks. Obviously they will use kamikaze machines trying to destroy as much as possible mines, minefields, and to reduce as much as possible Ukrainian defense positions in this area. And the second area that the Russians are focused currently is the second stronghold by the name of Zverinets, but there is still a lot of job to do, and obviously it will take another few days to complete the clearing of this area. And even if the Russians are able to do this, there is still another defense belt that the Russians need to take control over, and I'm talking about this yellow line. Only after getting to this yellow line, the Russians will be able to start pressure from the north in direction of Novomikhailivka. Only after establishing control over this yellow line, the Russians will have chances, significant high chances, to capture the city by attacking from three directions: from the south, from the north, and from the east. But during the battles on the south and on the north, the Russians continue attacking Novomikhailivka with missiles, because during those battles that took place during the previous 2 days, the Russians managed to discover more Ukrainian positions, more ammo depots, and concentration of forces. And of course, there are a lot of targets to work out, and the Russians were pretty focused on this direction during the previous night and the previous day. When talking about Robotyne area, we also got a lot of updates from this territory, mainly from the Russian side. The Russians continue bombing and attacking the Ukrainian forces that currently are tried to be concentrated in the fields between Orekhov, Novoandreevka, and Novodanilovka. For these purposes, the Russians were using all types of weapons they have, including FAB-500. For example, in the area of Novoandreevka, the Russians managed to discover another concentration of Ukrainian forces, and as a result of FAB strike, they managed to destroy some forces, some units, and force the Ukrainians to step back and to stretch their forces in different directions. Furthermore, the Russians had complete control over the supply road and trenches in this area, and as a result of another FPV drone hunting, the Russians managed to discover another Ukrainian soldier, and as a result of strike, that Ukrainian soldier probably was at least wounded or even killed. When talking about Verbovo, Novoprokopovka, today the Western sources and the Ukrainian sources reported that currently the Ukrainians are no longer control 100% of Robotyne. We will update this map and we will mark Robotyne as a gray zone, so basically the Ukrainians control just the northern part and the southern part is in the gray zone. Furthermore, the Russians, as a result of clashes during the previous day, managed to maintain their positions on the south and to cut this small salient of Ukrainian progress of Ukrainian territory under their control. And currently the Russians are pretty focused their artillery and air forces in this direction. This area is under very heavy fire from the Russian forces, and as I understand, probably the Russians have some plans to start offensive between the fields in this direction, while the Ukrainians haven't managed to mine this territory and create trenches and to dig in deeper. And this attack will allow the Russians to cut completely the Ukrainian Robotyne-Verbovo salient and to reduce till zero the entire Ukrainian progress of summer greatest counteroffensive operation. So we'll see what is going to be next. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.